think it would be great. We've invited our panel members because they come from different perspectives of energy and the energy transition. They come from backgrounds that include both engineering and the social sciences, as well as those involved in entrepreneurship and industry. And so this is going to give us a broad perspective on the area of energy and the energy transition. And so I'm just going to ask each of the panelists, and we'll start with Nate, remind me.
Nate.
Nate, yes. We're going to start with you, Nate, and maybe if you can just introduce yourself, your name, your current employer, and a little bit about your expertise. And if we could keep these to about 3 minutes maybe each, that would be great.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nate Millicum. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of a company called Electric Power Systems. So we do electric powertrains for aviation and aerospace. My background, I have a master's degree from Arizona State University. I worked at Honeywell Aerospace for about 6 or 7 years. My exposure to lithium battery technology is I led the development for the first lithium-ion battery that was certified for commercial aviation. When I left Honeywell, I managed all their electric power portfolio, so nobody cared about these things back then, but now they all seem to care about them. Electric motors, batteries, solid-state power distribution systems. Worked at a power semiconductor company, ran mergers and acquisitions. We bought a battery company. I was put in charge and I couldn't get away from it, so we spun that company out in 2016, formed Electric Power Systems. We're in Los Angeles, and we relocated from Los Angeles to Logan because of you and some of the research that you were doing. So we are backed by the Boeing company, we're backed by Stafford, we're backed by Hyundai, we're backed by United Airlines, and JetBlue, our investors. So I think we've raised, between research, external and internal, about $100 million in commercializing these technologies, and we have the most flight hours in the world of electric and hybrid electric propulsion systems. So great to be with you.
Thank you, Nate. Okay, yeah, go ahead down that way first, I guess.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Stacia Ryder. I am an assistant professor in the sociology department here at Utah State University. And I do a lot of work on equity and justice issues around energy projects and transitions. So looking at how communities are engaged and included in decision making that influences them, how costs and benefits of projects are distributed, and things like that. So some projects that I've worked on include solar projects, geothermal projects, shale gas, and efforts at decarbonizing like large industrial sectors across the UK.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Alan Hall. I'm basically a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and philanthropist, and I combine those all into one great whole. I have had a very successful career, and I decided at this age that I'm in now, why don't I start a new business? So I thought, let me see, what can I disrupt at this age? And I'm taking coal and turning it into hydrogen gas. So I'll be talking with you today about that initiative and how we're trying to keep all the coal mines in the United States open. And instead of burning coal, we warm it and get the interesting things that come from coal. So I'm about coal is good, not bad.
My name is Regan Zane. I'm the director of the Aspire Research Center, which is a center headquartered here at Utah State University. We have over 10 universities involved around the country, including Utah State University and USU and Utah State, including Utah State and the University of Utah here in Utah. We're all things infrastructure for electric vehicles and electrification of transportation. We're looking across the spectrum from cars to buses, all the way to trains and trucks, and even into aviation, and working closely with EP Systems on that side of things. We are looking to be that trusted guide into how do we, in a practical way, move forward towards an electric transportation system, including battery electric systems and fuel cell hydrogen electric systems. This is involving all of these industries. We have over 60 industry partners that are involved in the Research Center. Again, that's crossing the nation. And we have a number of very exciting projects, including here in Utah, we'll be deploying the world's first all-electric semi-truck pulling doubles up Sardine Canyon here in a few months on battery electric power using a 1 megawatt wireless charger. It'll be charging right here in Logan. Anyway, so some exciting things coming up. Really excited to be here with you today.
I think we need to pass the mic back down because we got out of order here a little.
Hi, I'm Ed Stafford, and I'm a marketing professor in the Huntsman School. Probably wondering what a marketing guy is doing here, but we've got entrepreneurs, so obviously marketing is accepted, I think, in the business field. I specialize in looking at the entrepreneurship and the diffusion of clean technology, renewable energy, and electric vehicles. Probably my biggest project here at Utah State was helping to get the Spanish Fork Wind Project off the ground, and so we started in that in 2002, trying to figure out how to get wind power and renewable energy going in the state. It took several years. It took till 2008 to actually get the project going. At that time, Utah was 95% coal-fired. Today we're down to about 53% coal-fired. But to get that first Spanish Fork project in the ground took a lot of marketing. We came up with messaging as to how to get legislators on board to be accepting of renewable energy. Many of them didn't accept climate change at the time, some still don't, and so we still have to work through those issues. My latest work now is electrification of kitchens, so electrification of electric vehicles is really exciting. Working on induction stoves. There was a big culture war thing on gas stoves, and so my daughter and I wrote an article on how to make induction stoves cool. And so our hashtag, which we'll be launching next month, is Get Off Your Gas.
Okay, well, thank you, each of the panel members, for that brief introduction. I'd like to kind of dive into this area now and think about innovation. And so I'm going to ask each of you to think about what are the things that you're seeing from your perspective that are the most innovative? And while we're talking about that, who are the key players who are driving innovation from your perspective around energy and the energy transition? And Nate, why don't we go ahead and start with you, and then pass to Ed, and then we'll go back down.
All right, well, it's great to have the microphone first, and then I'll pass it around. So where are we seeing the most innovation in electrification space? One of the interesting things that's happening in aerospace and defense is when you think about propulsion, propulsion is such a fundamental capability that enables us to fly. And propulsion traditionally were mechanical systems that were very, very complicated and just modern marvels. So the minute you go to electric, what's interesting is the economics completely change. There's a reason why I only see 2 engines on every airplane, because that's about all you can afford, is 2 engines. And there's a reason why you see commoditization in airplanes, is because engines and propulsion is really expensive. And fun-filled fact, every major revolution in aerospace has been preceded by a step change in propulsion technology. It goes right back to the Wright brothers. We had portable fuel storage. We also had a light combustion engine and components that we could get off the ground. If you actually think about what we fly today, a geared turbofan engine, high bypass ratios, that's what's actually made it really cheap for us to get across the globe and connect our economies. And so we see electrification as the next jump. And what's interesting is it changes the design space. You can put propulsors anywhere you want. You can have propulsors that give you vertical lift capabilities. You can have propulsors that actually push the aircraft. You can have propulsors that pull the aircraft. You can use them at any time in the flight envelope. And so what's this done is this has completely opened up the design space in airframe design. And so now you start to see design space where people are saying, well, I will take advantage of this and I'll design an airplane that just gets us around within a highly congested city. So if you go to some of the congested cities of the world like New Delhi, Bengaluru, go anywhere in South America, even in Los Angeles, it's really hard to get around these cities. And now we can design aircraft that are cheap and affordable that just do hops. We're also seeing this around the design space of people who can do regional. We're seeing it in the military space. So personally, I think some of the most innovations that are most exciting is on the propulsion side. And it's now starting to take propulsion along with software and advanced control logic and bundle it all together and then open up the design space. So we see companies like Joby, Archer, we work with Archer, Embraer, the Boeing company, doing all kinds of new designs that really probably haven't had this level of innovation in aerospace probably since the space race back in the 60s.
Okay. One of the things that I've learned in working with electricity here in the state of Utah is that electricity is not a free market, and it's highly regulated, and so you have to find ways to get renewable energy onto the system. You still have to work through government, through regulatory agencies. And so the one piece of legislation that I think is very innovative here in the state of Utah, it's the first of its kind, is called the Community Renewable Energy Act. And it started out with 25 cities across the state of Utah that plan to become 100% renewable energy, or I should say net 100% renewable energy by 2030. Sadly, some of those cities have dropped out of the program, and what's happening is that there's fears or concerns about what the cost is going to be if we switch, if everyone in the city, and that means all businesses, all residents, and all commercial entities will all be running off of renewable energy. And they're concerned about the costs. And so my colleague, Rosalind McCann, and I are actually monitoring these cities to see the journey that they're taking in terms of proposing this type of process, and they're actually being able to stick with it so that they can adopt this 100% renewable energy. Right now there are 18 communities. They represent 25% of the energy load in the state of Utah. So if we actually get these cities to cross the finish line, that will make Utah at least 25% renewable energy. And we don't have any mandates or any legislation to encourage Utah to become to move into renewables. And so this is one of the challenges that we have. Other states have mandates that they're going to be 100% renewable energy by 2050. And so we're one of the few states that doesn't have that type of thing. So this legislation really is the only mechanism that Utah has to become fully renewable in a close, in a close amount of time. Why is this a concern? Because we might have carbon taxes and things of that nature if we don't switch off of our coal and natural gas, and we as the ratepayers will have to pay it, and yet it's the utilities that basically don't care because they know that the ratepayers will pay it. And so it's an issue that we need to move into. The other point of this is also the energy water nexus, and this is something that I've been trying to promote in the state of Utah. And that is that because we're so coal dependent and natural gas dependent, we guzzle billions of gallons of water in order to generate that electricity. If we were able to switch over to renewables and to batteries, we would be able to save on that water, particularly as we are concerned about the shrinking Great Salt Lake, we're concerned about our drought. And so these are, I think, are two of the kind of the big issues that I see, at least locally in the state of Utah, the water issue, and also this notion of how we can get into renewables.
So in terms of technological innovation, I am new to Utah, but I was previously working on a large European geothermal project where we were working on heat and energy storage through various means, borehole, aquifer, and mine water. So that's probably the extent of what I know about technological innovation, but obviously there is geothermal capability in Utah. So I'm actually looking forward to connecting with folks who are interested in that. But I think there are a couple other things that we should be thinking about when we think about technological innovation. And one is, where are we putting our time and our money? And if we're putting it into innovation like something like carbon capture and storage, while not simultaneously reducing our carbon emissions, there's going to be opposition because we're not actually addressing the problem. We are just prolonging our reliance on fossil fuels, and we've already seen some level of public resistance when it comes to this. And then I also think we can think about innovation beyond technology. So for me, what does innovation look like when it comes to community engagement on energy projects? And I think this largely, for me, comes from operators and developers. And we've noticed that how operators and developers think about community members, concerned community members, tends to influence what sort of engagement strategies those developers use. And so typically, you know, if there's a developer that really values community, they're going to do things like spend more money on quieter drill rigs so that the disturbance of noise is reduced to that community. There's a geothermal project in the UK called the Eden Geothermal Project that originally was proposed as a wind farm project. The community did not want a wind farm, and so instead of forcing them to have that wind farm, they completely scrapped their plans and came up with a new one in a place that has a history of mining, so was much more comfortable with underground interventions than they were wind farms. So I could give a few more examples, but we have a very limited amount of time. But I just want to say I think that moving away from like a public relations approach, which we saw a lot of in shale gas in the U.S., toward approaches where community engagement specialists and social scientists and people who do science communication are the people who are interfacing with the community, because that's not really what public relations is, right? It's important and it has its role, but the community members sort of see through public relations as an image and brand campaign. So those are some of the things I'm seeing in my world that I would also call innovative.
I'm a little bit of an outlier here because I love coal. So I'm going to say a couple of things and then get into innovation and how disruptive we're going to be. I'm sure, are there any marshals in the room who would handcuff me and drag me out of here? I hope not. I have a partner in South Africa. We will be doing business with all 80 countries that have coal reserves. But in South Africa, I'm talking to a large corporate organization, and you know, the hour difference is significant. We're on a Zoom call. I'd see his face because of the glow of the screen, and I said, "Why don't you turn on your lights?" And he said, "Alan, we only have electricity 12 hours a day." I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "We just shut down." I said, "What about your refrigerator?" He said, "We had to buy a power system to do our refrigerator." And I'm thinking the renewable side is important. We get there, but I'm like a little bit time out. Let's figure out how we can use fossil fuel in a clean way, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and still provide electricity. So our hydrogen is meant for fuel cells and for electricity. That's where we're headed with it. And we do it in such a modular, inexpensive way that we basically think about a ton of coal, we get 150 pounds of hydrogen out of that, but we capture the gases and we sequester things and we reuse them and we sell them. So we're net zero in a way of what we're doing. So the philosophy is, let's see what we can do with that particular material. The state of Wyoming is in a dither because all of their tax dollars come from the many coal mines in Wyoming. And they're telling me, the governor tells me, look, I won't be a ghost state as soon as all these mines are closed. We've got to figure out what we can do. The problem with the coal mining industry is it's old. It goes back, you know, to Roman times when you think about it, is they've only thought about shipping it to burn it. They haven't thought outside the box, ever. And it's like, wait a minute, there's chemistry inside coal. There's all kinds of wonderful things, hydrocarbons in there that maybe we ought to look at. And if we can have those and do it in a clean fashion, why wouldn't we be looking at that? So we've spent the last 3 years digging into trying to understand how we can save the planet and at the same time provide carbon products that the world's still going to need. And I can tell you more about that later. But that's why we're a little bit of an outlier, is as entrepreneur as I am, we're looking to disrupt things and still be able to participate with renewables around having electricity.
Speaking of electricity, really good handoff, and even exactly as was just stated, you know, there are real challenges, and can you imagine only having power 12 hours? I mean, I think we were on a trip in Africa, and I think the site that we were camping at had a similar arrangement. They had, it was in alternating 3-hour segments. So we had 3 hours on, 3 hours off, 3 hours on, and then I think the evening off. The biggest innovation, and one of the significant challenges that we see around electrification, not just electric vehicles, but we're seeing energy efficiency improvements in vehicles, in buildings, and as well as in the manufacturing and related industries. As we see tremendous growth of the loads on the electric utility, of course there's a significant challenge in balancing from generation to load, and doing so in a sustainable, reliable, dispatchable way that keeps the lights on 24 hours a day, which is a major, major challenge. One of the biggest innovations that we see coming up, of course it's been talked about in various ways, but it's really happening now, and you're going to see it over these next 10 years, is a rethinking of the electric grid and how it's managed and controlled, from a variety of these resources to this variety of loads. We're going to be moving away from the general concept of a producer, a single plant that's producing and just running, that's continuously providing to specific loads throughout the grid, and moving towards a scenario where we have a far more dynamic system and a completely different relationship between the utility and a variety of producers, as well as each of these growing loads. So, the innovation, the excitement that we're most interested in this coming 10 years to help support electrification both in vehicles and in buildings is an entirely new relationship between utilities, loads, energy storage, and a variety of power generation opportunities. Think about electric vehicles. If we look at the market, gasoline and diesel are roughly $500 billion a year market. Any idea what the current total market is in the US for electricity? It's roughly the same, about $500 billion a year. Conceptually, if we were to convert the entire transportation industry to electricity, we'd be roughly doubling the current utility. And I mentioned that truck, our nice super truck that's going to be running, it's going to take 1 megawatt to charge it in 20 minutes. If each truck were to show up unannounced, on demand, and say, I need my megawatt, and by the way, that was for a 25-minute charge. What they really wanted was a 15 or 20-minute charge. So we're probably talking a few megawatts per truck. These are disturbances to the electric utility and disturbances to the grid, and makes it difficult for the utility to cost effectively maintain that they have sufficient power generation to support those loads. So what we're most interested in on this transformation of electric utility, particularly from our perspective in Aspire, is how can vehicles, electric vehicles, be a resource to that future of the electric grid? And the only way they can be so is to have vehicles as controllable, managed, predictable loads to the electric utility. And that's something that we're looking very carefully at. I mentioned that megawatt truck. We're also looking at solutions that would allow your vehicles to be charged more continuously. Many of you may know this. One of the technologies that we're best known for is what we call in-motion charging. We're dynamic charging these vehicles on the road. Can you imagine now in an urban area, we kind of see this a little bit in Logan, but much more so in Salt Lake and even more so in LA or New York. But if we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps even more vehicles circulating around the city, if they are now being managed and controlled by the utility as a resource, even just dynamically controlling how they're loading. If you had vehicles that could act not only as a managed, controllable resource to the grid, but a moving resource to the grid, that the utilities never had a moving load they could control. They would love to take your air conditioner and move it to this sector when it's overloaded, if they can control it. This is one of the most exciting things we're looking at, is can we bring forth a new future where you can imagine an interacting electric utility grid that balances electric vehicles together with more electric buildings in a controlled, dynamic fashion, so we can balance continuous outputs of nuclear plants, coal, hydrogen. I think this is interesting. I'd like to see how that plays in, together with renewables. So we're very excited to see how that progresses.
I want to add that part of your innovation and your disruption is we're going to disrupt the grid as well. So our hydrogen becomes electricity right next door to a data center. It doesn't even go up on the grid, right? This university can all be off the grid with this sort of an approach. So we're thinking we're going to come in and segment the markets and find those who need it. I heard on the news driving up here, there's a new data center Going into Utah, they need, what was it, 500 megawatts, right? How would that suck the system dry? So we're saying we can be your solution. We'll just bring the electricity right to you through what we're doing.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about, it takes varying expertise, varying perspectives to address what is our challenge for the future. And I guess I'm looking at each of you to think, where is it you see areas of collaboration in your own area? And as a scientist, I might ask myself the question, who could really add perspective to what I'm doing? So my question here is, let's talk about collaboration and bringing those diverse perspectives together for a few minutes and what it can mean to a project. And so I'm going to start with Station since she's got the mic.
I thought that might be the case. I think I'll just give a quick example. The large European geothermal project that I was mentioning, when that call came out through Horizon Europe, I think it was, having a social science component, even though the call was for demonstration sites, right? So we were developing 6 geothermal demonstration sites. But that call required a social science component to be on sort of equal footing with the technological development that's happening. That's one step, but that doesn't necessarily change the culture and attitude. I've worked on many different interdisciplinary projects in terms of energy, in terms of climate, in terms of disasters, and sometimes you can tell that different perspectives are valued. You're brought on really early in a project. Your feedback is taken into consideration. And sometimes you work with people who say, I don't believe social science is a science, but you're working with them on a project, right? And so it can be really difficult, but I think the parallels that I see here are not just collaborating in terms of interdisciplinary approaches. We do need all of these different sets of knowledges that I kind of mentioned for science communicators, community engagement specialists, social scientists, but we also need community and local knowledge in there too. So in a lot of ways, some of the things that I was saying about how developers and operators treat communities, I think we also need to think about how we treat the people we work with across disciplines and the different approaches that they have. And so a quick example of bringing in sort of local sets of knowledge and how that works might be, there were 2 communities in the UK that were both really locally opposed to shale gas. One of the biggest concerns was seismicity. It's a little different than in the US, that's not often the concern here, but anyway, they were 2 very different, like, geological areas, different soil compositions, what have you. And the one farming area, when the developer did some of their ecological testing and whatever, it was a really, really, really wet year, which means the results that they got were not going to actually be reflective of what the norm is, which, you know, depending on what you're doing, could have big implications for your calculations, your measurements, your development. And so I just think that's a really good example of how people, just from that lived experience of farming that land and living there for generation and generation and generation, really have something to contribute when we talk about, you know, making these different changes. And it's not always relevant to every single project or every type of energy innovation, but it's just an example. Which way would you like me to go? Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the best way to look at these difficult problems is to step back and look at it holistically and see how the different areas and the different disciplines interact with each other. And so that could be on the generation side, that could be on the distribution side, also on the vehicle side, how we consume it, how we use it, and recognizing all those interfaces, including community interfaces, are very, very important in the design criteria. One of the things we experience within propulsion, particularly in electric propulsion, is we have about every kind of engineer that you can imagine. We got electrochemical specialists, we have software, we have embedded, we have electrical engineers, we have mechanical engineers, we have propulsion engineers, and we have aerostructures engineers. And what's interesting is when you step back and you look at a problem, everybody has a bias on how to solve a problem within their discipline. And so one of the cultural values that we try to instigate within our company is, we call it sustainable solutions, but we say complex problems are solved by embracing diversity of thought and recognizing your bias, and then actually agreeing that you're going to accept the best ideas no matter where they come from. I don't care if that's the $18 an hour person on the floor who had the idea. If it's a good idea, let's use the idea. But then how do you actually get to a unified solution? That's where we tend to struggle. And our guidance is good frameworks and good data. That's ultimately what we should use to make a decision. If you bias your framework to, I can solve it here, or that's the problem, well, you're probably impacting something that you didn't even think about. That's a problem. So I agree. I think a holistic approach is usually the best approach to solve this.
So one of the areas that I've been thinking a lot about is cultural change. And so in my project with induction stoves, people love their gas stoves. I mean, think about how macho it is to cook something over an open flame. And so the idea of now saying that, hey, we're going to switch this away, or we're going to use electromagnetism to clean, to cook your things, that it's a challenge. And so when you look at how culture has changed, so that way they become more accepting of different things, it's very often through the arts, and it's through music. And so in terms of the kind of cross-disciplinary research and kind of embracing cross-disciplinary perspectives, I think if you see how culture has changed in our country, where people were very much for the Vietnam War, and then in the 1960s when you had folk singers who were opposed to the Vietnam War, and people heard that music, and then that changed America to become opposed to the Vietnam War, and how music and art had changed the culture. And so as I look at how we can get people to buy into electric vehicles and buy into electrified kitchens and electrified buildings where we're not using natural gas, but we're using heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps like I have in my own house, how do we encourage that? And so I agree, it's not, I'm a marketer, and so I'm always thinking kind of more broadly, not just in terms of marketing strategies and tactics, but how can I bring about change that encompasses other facets of society. And so I think, and in terms of my work, in terms of getting consumers to want to become greener and to act greener and to buy greener products, we're going to have to look at these broader perspectives such as the arts and such as culture and music. In particular, if Taylor Swift wrote a song about climate change, we might all suddenly get on board. My understanding is that she flies so much in her plane, so she's not really into climate and environmental stuff, unfortunately. But maybe we can get Miley Cyrus or somebody else to sing a song about it. But those types of influence, social influence, is the most powerful form of persuasion. And if we can get people who are admired to promote these things, that can help bring society on board.
Ladies, do you have electric appliances in your home? Raise your hand if you have an electric appliance. All of us have electric appliances, don't we?
Of course.
So the reason I say that is I'm also a marketing sales guy, right? And what I've learned as an investor is I really want to understand who the customer is that's going to buy whatever that we're going to have. I started my research by talking to my wife. And I said, what if you didn't have electricity there for 12 hours a day? She said, where would I march? Where would I let the government know I'm not happy with 12 hours a day? Because I need electricity. I've got to have it, right? The holistic approach for us is we started with who has a compelling need for power? Who would that be? And in this case, we were looking at electric power and knowing where things are going and what's being done now, but knowing we're not totally there yet, we put together a team of people who we said to them, come up with a solution for electricity. What material would you use that's currently available? And they all said hydrogen, but we got to get hydrogen right. So you can use electrolysis and spend a lot of water and electricity making it. The chemists in the group said, let's just go and see what we can do with coal. Let's see if we can't pull that off. We rounded up then as a venture capitalist, others who understood that, other people that in a business setting, all the particular organizations that said, if we're going to tackle this problem on electric power, let's all think together about figuring that out. 3 years later, we think we have the solution. So for me, it starts with what does the customer want, what's compelling to them, and that's where we started.
All right, I get to go last, so kudos, agree. What else can I say? Except Ed, definitely on the marketing. What is that?
Except Ed, okay, go.
Except Ed, we wanted to come. Well, the challenge is we need to up the marketing, because I think it was even just last week that my own mother was telling my wife, you've got to have a gas stove. We've had this discussion. So completely agree with the holistic approach. And within the Aspire Center, I mean, that's the only way we've been able to have any progress. We work across engineering, we work with social sciences, we definitely need to talk more. We've been working heavily with the College of Business, and that's across all of our universities. We require what we call an electrified transportation systems class, but it's essentially Aspire 101. But first semester, a student comes in, we want them to take this course, and it's taught by each of the different disciplines. And essentially, it's just first and foremost trying to get us to speak the same, understand each other. What are the values and interests across these different areas? What's that different perspective that really changes your thinking? And then how do you get into a workshop and a meeting where you would say, okay, I'm willing to take my own biases off and hear this other side. So completely agree. And just some anecdotal points on the community engagement aspect of this. I mean, it's hard to imagine any scenario of innovation that isn't going to tie into the end user and to be important to understand their end use and considerations. And in our case, for example, we were going electric. We were looking at a couple of our pilot projects down at the Utah Inland Port. I don't know if you've been down in the area, south of Salt Lake City Airport, near the refineries, near a lot of the industrial space. And we thought this would just be wonderful. We're going to explain how we're going electric with all the trucks, and the emissions are going to go down, the air quality is going to go up. And we were holding community engagement sessions, and first thing we got was, oh, wait a minute, are you the group that wants to put that big transmission power pole in my front yard and told me that it would look good? No, that's not us, but let's look into that. And the more we started digging, and we were talking about, we're going to help support freight in the region, and that's going to bring more warehousing and more jobs. And again, the first question, well, are you talking about jobs to support my family, or are these box cutting jobs over at the factory? And each of these points, get us thinking, okay, how is this technology really going to change lives in the communities where it matters most? And that's really driving innovation. We think it's very important.
I appreciate that, and I think that's one thing that comes up a lot in my work is trust building, and it's not just about spending resources and money, but also time, right? And it's very easy for errors in other technologies or other places with the same technology, other companies, right? If someone screws up, the ramifications are quite broad for that. So thank you. I've got some other thoughts, but I'll hold off.
Okay, so we're going to move into kind of a rapid round to end us here. And so the rapid paced round will have two components. First, what can the university do? What should the university be thinking about to contribute? And the second one is what's something all of us should be reading to keep up? So university thinking, what should we be thinking about? And that could be very broad. It could be research, it could be workforce development, it could be many things. And what should we be reading in this area?
Okay, I'm going to be real fast. For me, it's the energy-water nexus. This idea, we have a water lab here at Utah State, And so I think the water lab can be a very big component in terms of our understanding of this energy transition. And the concerns that we have, nuclear, coal, gas, they're all big water guzzlers. Can we have those types of technologies in Utah and still save the Great Salt Lake and still be able to provide for, we're going to double our population in the next 40 years here in Utah, and so we're going to have double the amount of water to maintain those people. So, something for you to think about. Second, the way that I kind of keep on top of my energy knowledge is through this thing called a smart brief, which I get. It's an e-newsletter that comes to me 5 days a week, and it gives me the top headlines of everyday news that's happening in renewable energy and sustainability. And so I highly recommend that, just so that you get a daily briefing as to what are the top news stories of the day. And I will just say, I just came across the Delta project over here, the hydrogen Delta project that's coming in, and it's a really exciting point because they're going to be using hydrogen and natural gas to be making our electricity out of Delta. And they're changing a coal-fired power plant to become a gas hydrogen system. So for me, that's really exciting to see that.
So maybe two quick thoughts. One, don't get infatuated with your technology for technology's sake. It has to have economic value, otherwise it doesn't get adopted. And so being able to think in those terms of what creates economic value and how you quantify it is generally what drives change much faster than any political cycle ever will. An example of that is, you look in our space in electric propulsions, Europe was leading us 10 years ago. We are way ahead of them now. And do you know why we're way ahead of them now? Is we showed there was an economic market for it. The one thing that the US can do better than anybody is we have a financial system, an academic system, and an entrepreneurial system like nobody else in the world. And when those three systems come together to solve a big problem, it's actually really hard to stop us compared to anywhere else in the world. The one thing you should be reading, you'll laugh at me, federal acquisition rules or standards, because when you're solving big problems, particularly in energy or transportation, these are highly regulated industries. And so if you can't prove it's safe and you don't know the frameworks that the current technologies are being used to evaluate if they're safe, you probably have no prayer or a very, very long, long road ahead of you to get adoption of your technologies.
The first part, yes, workforce training was the response that I had down, but with a caveat that we need to broaden our understanding of what constitutes the workforce, what types of jobs, like I've been saying, who's included, diversifying the teams that are involved, and making sure that we are creating systems that work for people and not only people just as consumers of energy, right? We exist in many other roles besides just consuming energy, and so I think it's important to keep that in mind. In terms of the community work that I do and thinking about public support or opposition, which is sometimes called social acceptance, there's a writer called Susanna Vattel who writes a lot about this. Probably the number one thing that I run into is people immediately complaining about NIMBYism, which, if you don't know, stands for not in my backyard, but this use of this term in the energy context has been sort of disproven by social scientists for over 10 years, and yet it's still infiltrating. So I would want to say, like, there's great readings, great articles by Vattel who addresses this. It's much more nuanced usually, it's contextual, it's place-based. And then I just want to make one final plug. So I should have said this in the beginning. I am also part of our college's Community and Natural Resource Institute. And Jessica Schad, the director, is here. She led a Utah People and Environment poll sort of through Canberra this year. And we've got lots of interesting data. I asked with a couple other people some energy questions. And so if you haven't read it and you don't know something interesting, we might need more marketing around stoves, but over 70% of Utahns said that they would support wind or solar energy projects in their area, and I thought that was actually pretty impressively high. So you might want to check that out if you're interested in knowing more about where Utahns are at?
I'm a recent member of the Board of Regents, so I work with all the presidents, not only the university presidents, but also the tech college presidents. And I've been very involved in working with them around sort of what's the future of education as we move forward in a very, I think, smart way. Right after this meeting, I'm up to see your new president. One of the things I've done early on is connect all the schools. I just came from a meeting at Utah Valley University with their School of Business around some research I want them to do on the topic of electricity. Last year at Utah State, we did one on a thing called soil amendment from carbon. So the University of Utah did one. They've all done something where we engage students to come up with their creative solutions. And what I liked about doing it with students is they think out of the box. We allow that to happen. Where sometimes we get biased and we get sort of in our camp and can't get out of it. So I use the universities a lot right now to do all kinds of things because faculties and students can be very insightful and helpful to overcome barriers. That's one. As to reading, I've learned that I would rather go to the source directly. So I call the governor and say, Governor, how about this? Or the Speaker of the House, how about this? I call my legislators, right? I call Mike Lee and say, Mike, how about this? I need to know at the levels that are part of this ecosystem, all the potential stakeholders, what do we need to keep in mind? So I'm on the phone this morning early with the mayor of Price, Utah, who's very concerned about what's going on down there relative to their coal mines, right? So for me, I'm not reading it so much. I'll get something that'll inspire me, but I'm talking to people firsthand about how should we take care of this situation.
On the university side, in our research and in our education, I think we've heard the same thing essentially all the way down the road here. We need to continue strengthening our vision, our emphasis on impact, on societal impact, which requires entire engagement across the disciplines as we've discussed. I think every graduating student coming out of our university should have a plethora of thoughts and input that they would love to talk to their mother about, that they would tell their father about, their siblings, their children, but they can explain why what they're doing is so impactful, why it is so important, how it's going to impact lives, because of the various experiences they had, not just with their discipline, but across disciplines through their education here at USU. I think that will continue to be a real strength for USU. I'd love to see it continue forward. All right, reading. I think you gave an option of watching, because nobody reads anymore, right? Kidding. Short video. You should watch a short video that Pacific Corp put together on the future electric grid. I think it'll help open your eyes to how to take innovation out of the university and change the world through a new future grid. Reach out to me and I can get you a reference to that video.
Well, I hope this panel discussion has stimulated your thoughts about energy and the energy transition. And I would like to personally thank Regan, Alan, Stacia, Nate, and Ed. Your perspectives were very valued here today. You each brought a unique contribution, and so let's give them a nice round of applause. And thank you. You can get something to eat, get something to drink.
Thanks, Lisa. That was quite the intro. It's so great to be here. Like she said, I'm Donnie. I have about 20 minutes to highlight some funding opportunities, and my number one goal is just to spark some thinking. Some of this you may already know, some you may not, but I just want to kind of spark your thinking. Oh dear, I'm a hand talker, this could be trouble. Okay, I have some slides because I'm going to throw a lot of words at you. So let me just get this going so you can, it just kind of, I think, helps visualize a little bit. So there's 4 things I want to talk about. I want to go through important legislative priorities right now. I want to go through requests for information. What are they? Why should we be paying attention? Why are they important? And what's open? I want to talk about notices of intent to issue. What's on the horizon? What's coming? And then lastly, just some current opportunities that your team could possibly jump on right now. So let's hop in. Here we go. I want to frame this short discussion that I recognize there's a lot of different perspectives and political priorities on how best to tackle these challenges in this industry, and it was already mentioned about the political life cycle, but I want to highlight the current administration's priorities, because that is where the recent, or the soon-to-be upcoming funding opportunities are coming. So through that lens, in 2021 and 2022, President Biden signed two historic pieces of legislation: the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So if you don't know about this, I highly recommend you look into it. This represents over a $350 billion investment into our community. And key trends, I've combed through a lot of the information on this. I just want you to have in your be thinking. Key trends include workforce development. We've already heard about that today. Large scale support for communities, getting this technology to the communities. Projects in rural America, and big investment in infrastructure. Think grid development, energy storage, transportation, and climate science. This is huge. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of money coming. It's coming in a lot of different forms. There's going to be tax rebates, incentives, loans, but a lot in research and development activities. Look into that, please. The second one is this Justice 40 initiative. It's tied right into those other pieces of legislation. But what it is essentially, Biden has committed 40% of the benefits from all of these efforts to be invested back into communities that have been left behind, that have been disadvantaged and underrepresented. I'm going to highlight in just a minute some opportunities that come directly from there. And Stacia, I see you nodding your head asking that. Okay, so that's there. And I'll have all of this linked within a few days on the Energy Summit webpage. So feel free to check back there early next week. It should be up there. And lastly, energy earth shots. I don't know, have any of you looked at this? Has anyone seen this? I see some, yeah, okay, so some of you have. Energy earth shots, I pulled it up here, and I didn't understand the shot at first. That didn't make any sense to me, so I had to look it up. But it comes from the saying of like a moon shot, right? We're shooting for the moon, we're taking a giant leap. So this is Biden's initiative, and these are the goals, which I've already heard, I think it was Ed who referenced. But Biden's goal of a clean electrical grid by 2035, and carbon net zero economy by 2050. So this energy shot kind of outlines the priorities there. And right here, I don't know if you can read them, they might be a little small, but I wanted to just let you just look at them really fast. These are kind of the key priority areas under this energy earth shot. So you can see there's some, like it's all about reducing the costs of some of these technologies so that we can then deploy them in the communities. There's just a lot there. Carbon negative shot on carbon technologies, floating offshore winds. If you go to this website and then click on one of them, like for example, that carbon negative in the bottom left corner, it'll open it up and it gives you a really, for me, as a non-energy sector expert, it really centered me within what was happening. It kind of outlined what was going on. So I highly recommend you find your work within there and check it out. Okay, there's a lot happening on the statewide level. As we all know, the Utah legislature is in session right now. There are bills being discussed and voted on. So I just wanted to highlight a couple that I thought were pertinent that may or may not be. So this House Bill 317, this one requires that the Utah Office of Energy conduct a study. And I was like, hey, now we work at a university. We're good at this stuff. So they have to conduct a study to analyze Utah's liquid fuel cell infrastructure and supply chain. I just thought, as a collaborative, we should be aware of this. Who are these representatives that are putting this out, and how can we support them? How can we be a part of that? I think that's really pertinent to us. House Bill 48 clarifies the role of the Utah's Office of Energy Director. Does anyone know who that is right now? I don't know. I didn't have a chance to look it up. But I want to know who that person is because this bill clarifies a lot from their role. And to me, as I read it, it felt like it gave them a lot of power to set policy, there's specific language about federal overreach and working with that. So that's an important one. And just this last one, emissions regulation amendment. This one has to do with the DMV and how they can register vehicles that are over a certain emission level. So statewide stuff is happening that we just need to be aware of as researchers here. Okay, requests for information. What are they and why are they important? So an RFI is a request for information from the subject matter experts. And you can find them published. I'm sure you've seen them on the normal funding web pages. They'll have in caps request for information or something like that. I think of it kind of like this. The Department of Energy says, hey, we've got a lot of money coming from President Biden's carbon storage initiatives, but what is the best way to invest this money? Let's ask the experts. So they'll craft and publish one of these RFIs and ask for information. It usually involves answering a series of questions. I've seen there's a couple open that's like has 5 questions to answer, and another one I think has up to 26. You can answer as few or as little as you want. Why is it important that we as Utah State answer these? Kind of 2 ways. This is a way to establish yourself as an expert in the field. You know what's going on in this field. You can help join the dialogue. And you should be involved. Less people respond to these RFIs and funding opportunities, so it's a way to kind of break out of the pack. And the second reason, if you really take the time to put in a good quality submission and good information, there's a higher chance that when the funding opportunity comes out, it might be directly aligned with your work. There are examples from this university of that happening. So if you, in a good, beautiful, I don't know if that's the right word, quality way submit to these, there's chances that it might be aligned with your work. So what's open? I want to highlight just a couple. Okay, I'll do both of them right now. So this first one I recognize might be kind of quick of a turnaround, but I didn't want to miss it. So the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management is making big investments, like hint, hint, big money, in the Carbon Safe Initiative over the next 5 years. They're trying to grow the carbon capture and storage industries. So right now, they're refining their research priorities. I think this was the one that has 5 questions. So if this is your area of expertise, you should check that out. The second one. This RFI will inform the Department of Energy's Carbon Management Program's gasification system area. They're asking in this RFI, like, what are your interests? What are your concerns? What are you seeing here? So I suggest you check it out. And another one I didn't put on here, but I think is really cool. Right now they're trying to craft the definition of, so it's the national definition of what is a zero emissions building. I'm sure some of you know what should be in that definition. Like, that is a really cool one to be able to put your voice in, because it will direct a lot of policy and directions in the future. So check that one out. I have the link if you need it. Reach out to me. Okay, just a couple more things I want to highlight. Notices of intent to issue. Especially in this sector right now, there are a lot coming out. That money that President Biden signed into law in 2021 and 22 is starting to be deployed now, a couple years later, through all these federal funding agencies. So there's a lot coming out. This is a beautiful way to know what's coming on the horizon and position your work. A lot of the notices will say, the all funding opportunity is expected to come out in fall of 2024 or early next spring or something like that. So this is a way, if you're reading these, and I highly recommend as your team or maybe as a research collaborative, we can find a way to be reviewing these notices so we can be positioned and ready to capitalize on these opportunities. So which ones are open? Let's go through, okay. There is one right now in all sorts of carbon management technologies. This one is, the top one is focusing on carbon conversion, carbon dioxide removal, point source carbon capture, carbon transport, and storage. This one says it should be out early 2024, so that's now. So be watching for that one. The second one, vehicle technologies, which we know we are working on here at Utah State. This one is really helping to develop and deploy vehicle technologies, focusing on reducing the weight and cost of the batteries, reducing the cost for vehicle charging and infrastructure. Another one, remember just a minute ago I talked about Biden's Justice 40 initiative. This one is tied to that. Clean energy Clean energy technology deployment on tribal lands. So this is really hoping to get these technologies on tribal lands to these communities that have been underrepresented. Really could be a really cool cross-disciplinary community engagement type research project. And this last one, regional resource hubs for purpose-grown energy crops. I know some teams on campus are working on feedstock supply chain, biomass technologies, and biofuels. This one is for you, and this hub it's developing goes right back into President Biden's energy shots that we were talking about. But there's a lot more notices out, so I highly recommend you do even just a quick search on grants.gov and look for these notices in energy. There's some coming soon on wind energy technology, regional clean hydrogen analysis, high performance, low cost converters, and a lot of projects and industries that are really energy and emissions intensive. So those are coming. Okay, last slide. What is open right now? The Sparks program. This is through the Department of Energy. This opportunity is looking for projects and technologies that are just going to blow this industry wide open. Like if you have something that is, they're not looking for these little changes. This one is for big changes. That one might be for you. I'm just going to stand up here. Okay, Marine Energy University, Foundational Research and Development. I know we have some folks working on marine energy. Topics include open source marine energy converters, sustainable offshore wind, marine energy, and aquaculture. And this one, strengthening American infrastructure. This one is really cool. And we had a question earlier about collaboration across disciplines. This one is looking at how do humans think about, or how do humans make decisions, and then how does that play into building infrastructure? How does that work together? There's a requirement on this one to have like an engineering discipline and then a social science discipline. So that one is really cool and really pertinent with how we are building a new infrastructure and new grids. Energy, power, control, and networks. This one is emphasizing electrical power systems, battery management, electric vehicles, and how that interacts with consumer behavior. And last one I just want to highlight. This one I just got a notice for late last week. Growing convergence research. Oh, did you see it too? Nice. We'll have to talk later. So this one is from the National Science Foundation. Convergence research is like multidisciplines coming together to solve like a big complex societal problem. And to me, the energy sector and the energy transition fits right in there. So it's going to require a team, but it's big money and it's 5 years of funding. So I highly suggest possibly today as you're networking, you kind of get some ideas. That is all I have for you today. It was just a quick overview, I hope it sparks some thoughts. In the Office of Research, we're developing and growing. I'm a new role, but we hope to bring capacity to support you in big, complex research proposals. So please reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Donnie. So as Donnie mentioned, this information will become available within a few days off our website that's associated with the research summits. I will point you to, that is in our research development part of our website. We're going to have their summits on different topics, and so it will be a great site to consult for both this topic and others. And so now we're open to the kind of open part of this afternoon, and so I encourage you to enjoy food and beverage and to network with those who have interests similar to your own. I will leave you with a couple of requests. As we think about how to grow research at Utah State, I'm thinking about topic areas for these research summits. And so if you find today useful, I want to hear from you and help me think about other areas where I can help bring people together to have these kinds of conversations. Second of all, again, Donnie is a resource, but I would also point you to your proposal development specialists within the colleges. Many of you have teams or individuals that are already supporting your work. They network directly with our office. And so you may want to have an initial conversation with your local proposal development specialist, who can then network with Donnie as well. And so with that, thank you for being here, and again, enjoy the networking opportunity. And enjoy the view. We like this place because of the wonderful view. And so thank you again for coming here today.